Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today we have Joel with us, CEO of InGenius Prep, and we're going to be diving into one of the biggest or hottest topics in college admissions right now, AI and college essays. So, Joel, let's jump right into it. I'd love to kind of start more broadly. When you think about college essays today compared to even 5 or 10 years ago, what feels most different to you?
I think that I'm continually impressed by how much things stay the same rather than how much they change. I think people assume that there are more variance, but the reality is that at the end of the day, most students default to writing about more or less the same thing. Essays sound more or less the same. I think that you have more audacious students these days who use just AI to write an essay and try to pass it off as their own, which I think is a very unsuccessful strategy in general. But I think that things are more similar today than they were 5 years ago than they are different. And I think that AI has, taken the students who would otherwise write a very bland, kind of lazy essay and instead turned it into a very bland AI generated essay that is, sort of unappealing for different reasons.
I think since AI is such a hot topic right now, can you give our listeners a snapshot of how colleges are actually thinking about AI and emissions, since there's a lot of headlines out there as well? So, what is actually happening?
Yeah, so I guess you could think of this, you could split the topic into how are applicants using it and then how are admissions offices using it. In terms of how are applicants using it, there's sort of good ways and bad ways. So the good ways of using AI is as kind of a brainstorming tool to sort of like write drafts on different topics and just sort of explore different ways of talking about those topics. It's not in that way all that different from finding, there used to be these books like 55 successful application essays to Harvard or to the Ivy League. It's not really meaningfully different from that. You can just sort of generate essays that are highly specific, meaning that they address a very specific topic in your life. In most schools, I think Caltech released some statement around like what is an acceptable use of AI in the application process. And, if you're using it for sort of like inspiration, if you're using it for, kind of thinking about organization of the essay, that's fine. But if you're using it to replace your own voice and your own content, that's not fine. I do think that that's a very fine line. It's kind of a slippery slope that it's like very hard to know at what point you're replacing your voice and content with AI versus just using it for kind of inspiration and structure. I think that a better use of AI in the admissions process is sort of as, to get feedback on things like extracurricular activities and, thinking through how you can apply your interests in creative or unique ways through your extracurricular profile. I think that's a little bit more interesting and probably a bit more useful. On the side of the actual colleges, so some colleges are using AI, some are not. Something that people should presume to be the case with admissions offices generally is that much like the institutions that they are a part of, they move slowly and they do not adopt new technologies quickly. It's going to take a while for these schools to sort of fully adopt AI. I think that the way that most universities are using AI currently, schools like Caltech, Virginia Tech, I think there's a variety of reasons why technical schools would be more likely to employ it and employ it aggressively. That there are other schools as well. I think that the way that they're using it is as a replacement for labor, but not a replacement for judgment. And what I mean by that is things that basically any person can do, like, identifying grammatical mistakes or syntactical errors in an essay, or, basically compiling academic qualifications, transcript information, etc. And those are things that you can use AI for. But when it actually comes to the judgment, is this student qualified? Is this a good student to admit, etc.? That's something that colleges have still vested in humans and are likely to for a long time. There's both practical and also legal reasons why you would not want to have AI making the final call on an applicant.
There are also a couple of other articles and posts online from Yahoo and LA Times. They are talking about how colleges are using AI to score essays and even conduct interviews. With so much of this confusion online, can you actually break down how common this actually is and what exactly AI is capable of when evaluating student work or applications?
I think that remains to be seen. I don't think that enough schools have been using it or using it for long enough that we know for sure how effective it would be at grading essays. Grading essays using AI, like you can grade things like, is this well written? Is it well structured? It's hard to grade, like, is the content of it meaningful? That's not really something that AI is sort of well suited to address. So most colleges are not in a position to completely replace like a human evaluator in that process. Though again, like using AI to say like, are there grammatical errors, are there spelling errors, are there syntactical errors? Like those are all things that AI can do extremely well and replace a lot of time and labor from humans, which is a very good use of AI. Right now, AI written essays are terrible. They're soulless, they're bland. They really do not accomplish anything. If you're applying to selective schools, the chances that you can write an essay using AI and get away with it is relatively low. I wouldn't recommend it. But eventually, AI should be able to mimic the tone and voice and humanity of a young adult. And when it does, what's likely to happen is that schools will eliminate essays entirely and they'll rely much more on interviews. And now those interviews might be conducted by an AI on the university side, but the individual student is going to have to do it live. There's also been some meaningful talk at like NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, about, sort of having proctored essay exams where it's like you come in and you write an essay live. They might try it. I think it's insane. I think that the resources that it would take to do that and do that well are crazy, and it doesn't really test what you want it to test. So I think it's more likely that they would abolish essays if that became necessary and focus on interviews instead.
I feel like families also imagine these AI tools and softwares making all the calls, but in reality, it seems more nuanced. But for parents and students, knowing how it's being used really matters, and it also helps shapes how we coach and guide and prepare students in these new times. So how are we helping students at InGenius?
We have a startup incubator. A lot of our students will start their own company and their own nonprofit. And that's honestly one of the most impactful and significant things that you can do in the admissions process is show universities that you're capable of creating something from nothing. That's the kind of qualification that most universities are looking for, perhaps above many other qualifications. You can use AI very effectively to give you ideas on how you pursue, like an idea, how you build an organization. And sometimes those ideas are actually quite good. So that's a very useful or a very good use of AI. Doing research. So researching summer programs and sort of which ones are a good fit for your personality and for your likes, and researching career paths and majors and things like that. So AI can be great at that. That's really good. As it comes to the application itself, part of the problem is that people use AI to replace essentially their humanity. That's what a lot of the application is about, your personal introduction to the admissions office. AI is very ill-suited to do that. It's good for researching schools. We use AI in sort of thinking through school lists for students using our kind of proprietary data set of historical students. That can be super effective, but it's just not good at replacing humans on the application itself.
Yeah, I had this student actually comment on our TikTok video recently, and this user commented, I use Walter for everything now. So apparently, Walter is an AI tool where it humanizes your AI generated essays. So it is a little bit concerning. What is your sentiment on that?
My immediate reaction is I've yet to see AI generated essays. It's not as though we haven't tried. Like we have like admissions experts and very, very smart people specifically try to see if we can generate a good essay using AI. If only because we want to know whether or not, like, what's coming down the pike, whether or not, essays are likely to be, basically abolished in the future. And so I've yet to see essays that are actually able to imitate the voice of like a 17-year-old. I have not yet seen that. I've seen essays that can sound more or less human, but very rarely does it actually sound like a 17-year-old young man or young woman. Internationally in this industry, there's a lot of companies that like write essays for students. So students don't even write them. Just the consultant, they pay the consultant writes an essay. But I used to always say is that it is nearly impossible for a consultant to write an essay and for it to be believable. It's like, it doesn't sound like it's written by a 17-year-old young lady. It sounds like it's written by a 40-year-old man. It's just like, it just doesn't sound right. Eventually, AI will be good enough that it should be able to mimic that voice. And when that happens, I expect essays will become meaningless and either abolished completely, or they just won't have a significant impact on the admissions process. There are schools like Princeton, for example, they have a component of their application that's like a graded essay. So things like that allow the admissions office to compare like what is the writing on your application to the writing that you submit in school. Now, if you've used AI for both, maybe they sound similar, but possibly they sound completely different, and that's a serious problem.
A lot of these essays and supplemental prompts from these schools are all about self-reflection and critical thinking. So I guess if students rely on AI to write or heavily edit their essays, they kind of risk losing that cognitive benefits of the process. So from your perspective at InGenius Prep, how do we guide students to use AI as a thinking partner rather than a replacement for their own reflection?
Yeah, I think that like high school curricula these days is increasingly divorced from the type of writing that you do on personal statements and on application essays. That is to say, most writing in high schools these days is nonfiction and expository. And so students aren't really reading like full novels. They aren't reading Hemingway and Dickens, et cetera. But we work with some of the top students at the most selective, most competitive high schools in the world, the best writers from that population. They still can't write a good personal statement on their own because they just have no experience doing it. For those students, AI can sometimes be useful because it can mimic a more kind of novel-like writing style as opposed to like a nonfiction writing style. It can be useful in those cases. But generally, it's sort of teaching students to bring humanity and introspection into essays is something that basically every student needs. In terms of how we ask them to use AI or encourage them to use AI, it really varies student to student, helping them brainstorm different structures, helping them, think through how you would address like a particular anecdote and talk about it. Honestly, though, it's like most of the time, which we just don't see AI adding a huge amount of value in the essay writing process. Like that's not the place where we see the most value for AI in the admissions process generally. And as soon as AI is super useful in writing essays, essays probably will not be used anymore. The fact that AI is not super useful in essays is probably part of the reason essays still exist. And so that's sort of like a catch-22 on AI and applications.
Before we wrap up, I did share two essays with you prior to our recording, so I'm not going to share it on our screen because of privacy reasons. But Joel, which one do you think was a real student essay and which one was AI generated?
I honestly didn't even need to read student B. Like I read student A, I read like 3 lines and I said, this is AI generated. It's soulless. Like, yeah, it's either just a bad application or it's AI or both. But it
Mm.
sounds like it's written by a robot. There's no personality. There's just nothing. There's no like, I don't know, warmth to it. So like the actual writing quality is very good, impressively good, maybe even too good. It's like, almost too polished, but there's just nothing personal about it. There's just like a complete lack of humanity there. And it's like way too matter of fact. Applicants almost always underestimate is the fact that schools, when they admit you, aren't just admitting you because you're qualified. They're also admitting you because they like you. A lot of people who work in admissions offices at these schools, they went to those schools. When they admit you, they're effectively saying, I want you in classes with me or on campus with me or at alumni events with me. They have to like you. And if you write an essay like that, where you clearly have zero personality, whether it's AI generated or not, they are not going to want to spend time with you. And that is actually a very important point. I encourage people to think about, if I were reading this, if I'm part of an exclusive club and I read this essay and I'm like, this student could be a part of my exclusive club. Do you like them enough to admit them? Like that's sort of what's going on in the admissions process. And if you use AI too much or to a significant degree, even if they don't think it's AI, they're just going to think that you're boring. And so that's no good. I wouldn't do it. There's so many other ways to use it that are so useful. That's not one of them.
Do you think students use AI because they're chasing that perfection? I guess just expect these adults in these admissions offices to be like, oh, they're expecting like a perfect essay and I need it to sound perfect. So that's why I'm using AI.
That's a really interesting question. I mean, my default assumption is that people are using it because they're lazy. There's probably some population of students that think that AI can write a better essay than they can. And in some respects,
Mm.
that's true. But in the respects that admissions offices care about, it's not. And so maybe they use AI because they're worried about that. A lot of students that we work with will submit work to us, at some point that's like obviously AI. You don't even need an AI detector. It's just so obvious. It's not the students who are hardest working. It's usually students who are, being lazy and not trying hard. If you're trying to apply for a fairly non-selective university, that's probably fine. But if you're applying to a very selective university with acceptance rates, below 20% or whatever it is, and you're lazy about it, like it will absolutely come back to bite you. There's no way around that. If AI can create a great essay, then the essays will be abolished or they won't be considered. As long as they're being considered, you can safely assume that AI is not generating great essays. That's probably a safe assumption.
Also, I'm thinking about international students and English not being their first language, and I guess they use AI as a tool to help to craft their essays. And also, sometimes it's hard for them to express themselves in a different language. So, I guess maybe in that way, AI could be a great tool to help them in their essays.
I don't think that there's a clear-cut answer to that. I doubt very much that schools have a clear-cut answer for that, because schools, as much as they say, like, we want it to be in your voice, if you send an essay that's in broken English to an elite college, they're not accepting you. And even if they know that the ones that aren't in broken English probably hired a consultant or used AI, et cetera. I think that when it comes to preserving the meaning but translating the language, I think that's a much more defensible use of AI than having AI stand in as the kind of progenitor of the actual content and the meaning itself. And it gets very, very sticky when it's like what makes for beautiful writing in Chinese is very, very different from what makes beautiful writing in English. So yeah, no, I think that's a complicated issue. I don't think that there's a clear answer to it. And I think that schools would be disingenuous to say that they have a clear answer to it. That said, if you're an international student, the reality is that you cannot be submitting essays that sound like they're written by somebody who isn't fluent, especially not to these really competitive schools. Your English level in your application needs to align with like your English language test, like the TOEFL or the IELTS.
So, Joel, as we wrap up, do you have any final words or advice to students and families out there listening to this right now?
I don't think that AI has changed the game in terms of how you should behave, whether in terms of like preparing for college or qualifying yourself for college, or in terms of the actual application process itself. I think it's a useful tool to sort of brainstorm ideas and get structures for essays sometimes and things like that. Colleges will continue to use it as a way of replacing labor. So anything that doesn't require doesn't require judgment, they're going to do. Every family I speak to, I think, is quite convinced that these admissions offices will eventually replace admissions officers entirely with AI. I strongly disagree. All these other schools, like the Ivy League and Ivy equivalent schools, for the most part, as long as they want to do that, they are not going to be able to use AI to make admissions decisions. They have to have humans doing that because a human's mind cannot be subpoenaed, but an AI algorithm can. That's a very serious legal issue. So I wouldn't expect that anytime soon.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. So, Joel, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today. As always, I'm sure we'll have more conversations like this in the future. So, thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.